Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be invisible while standing in plain sight? To be labeled so broken that even hope seems like a luxury you can't afford? Today's story will shatter everything you think you know about worth, value, and the power of one person who refuses to see damage where others see only disposal. This isn't just about survival. It's about discovering that sometimes the most beautiful masterpieces are created from the pieces everyone else threw away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in the Riverside group home buzzed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the common room where 17 teenagers sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs. Maya Shun pressed herself into the corner seat, her oversized gray sweater pulled down over her hands, dark hair falling like curtains around her face. The monthly placement meeting was about to begin, and she already knew how this would end. Rebecca Walsh, the group home director, strutted into the room wearing her fake smile and crisp business suit. Behind her followed 3 couples, each clutching folders and wearing the kind of hopeful expressions that would soon turn to polite disappointment. Maya had seen this dance 100 times before. The couples would scan the room like shoppers at a clearance sale, their eyes lingering on the younger kids, the ones who still laughed easily, the ones whose files didn't require a medical degree to understand. "Good morning, everyone," Rebecca announced, her voice dripping with practiced enthusiasm. "Today we have some wonderful families here looking to open their hearts and homes. Remember, put your best foot forward and show them what makes you special." Tommy Martinez, a stocky 15-year-old with arms covered in tattoos he'd given himself with a safety pin and ink, snorted from across the room. "Yeah, Maya, make sure you show them your art collection," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Several kids snickered. Maya's grip tightened on her sleeves, pulling them further down to cover the faint scars that crisscrossed her forearms like a roadmap of her worst nights. The first couple, the Hendersons, were in their early 40s with matching polo shirts and nervous smiles. They made their way around the room, chatting with each teenager for a few minutes before moving on. When they reached Maya, Mrs. Henderson crouched down with the kind of exaggerated enthusiasm people used with scared animals. "Hi there, sweetie. What's your name?" Maya's throat felt like sandpaper. The words were there, trapped behind years of learning that speaking only led to more questions she couldn't answer, more forms to fill out, more disappointed faces when the truth came out. She managed a barely audible whisper. "Maya, that's a beautiful name. What do you like to do for fun?" Mr. Henderson asked, consulting his clipboard where Maya knew her file was summarized in clinical terms: severe anxiety disorder, selective mutism, history of self-harm, multiple placement failures, high risk. Maya's hands trembled slightly. She wanted to tell them about the sketches hidden under her mattress, the way she could draw faces from memory with perfect detail, how she could look at a building once and recreate every brick, every shadow, every crack in the sidewalk. Instead, she just shrugged. The Hendersons exchanged a glance that Maya recognized immediately. It was the same look she'd seen from the Johnsons last month, the Patels before that, and the dozen families before them. Polite interest shifting to uncomfortable realization that some kids came with too much baggage, too many complications, too much damage to fix with love alone. "Well, it was very nice meeting you, Maya," Mrs. Henderson said, already standing up. "You seem like a lovely girl." Lovely girls didn't get returned to group homes after 3 days because they had panic attacks at the dinner table. Lovely girls didn't end up with files thick enough to use as doorstops. Maya watched them move on to Jessica, a bubbly 12-year-old who immediately launched into a story about her pet hamster back at her last foster home. The second couple lasted even shorter with Maya, the moment they heard Rebecca whisper about special needs and therapeutic intervention. They nodded politely and focused their attention on the younger children. Maya felt herself shrinking further into her chair, becoming smaller, more invisible, exactly what everyone seemed to want from her. By the time the third couple approached, Maya had already checked out mentally. She was sketching in her mind, drawing the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a bird in flight, mapping the pattern of scratches on the linoleum floor. Mrs. Chun had taught her this trick years ago, back when they lived in the apartment above the laundromat and money was tight but love was abundant, before the accident, before everything fell apart. Maya's been with us for 14 months now. She heard Rebecca explaining to the couple in hushed tones. She's had some challenges with previous placements. Trust issues, you understand. Some kids just aren't built for family life. The words hit Maya like physical blows. Not built for family life. As if she was defective machinery, a factory error that couldn't be returned or exchanged. She thought about Sarah, her little sister, who'd been placed with a family in California 6 months ago. Sarah, who was only 11 and still believed in happy endings. Sarah, who probably didn't even remember what Maya looked like anymore. Tommy's voice cut through her thoughts. Nobody wants the broken ones anyway. Might as well get used to aging out. He said it with a cruel smile, but Maya caught the flash of pain in his eyes. He'd been here longer than anyone, watching younger. Kids get chosen while he got older and angrier, and more certain that some people were just meant to be forgotten. As the couples finished their rounds and gathered near the door for private discussions with Rebecca, Maya stood up slowly. Her legs felt unsteady, like she might collapse if she moved too fast. She walked toward the hallway, each step echoing. In her ears like a countdown to another month of waiting. Another month of being passed over. Another month of proof that some people really were too broken to be loved. Behind her, she heard Rebecca's voice floating down the hall. Maya's a challenging case. Sweet girl, but the trauma runs deep. She needs a very specific type of family, someone with experience in therapeutic care. Maya reached her shared bedroom and closed the door softly behind her. She pulled out the worn sketchbook from under her mattress and opened it to a fresh page. Her hands, steady now in the only way they knew how to be, began to draw. David Torres pulled his weathered pickup truck into the parking lot of Riverside. Group home, the afternoon sun glinting off the building's cracked windows. He'd made this drive from Millbrook exactly once a month for the past 3 years. Ever since he'd gotten his license as a therapeutic foster parent. Each time, he told himself he was just looking, just seeing if there was a kid who needed what he could offer. Each time he drove home alone. His colleagues at Child Protective Services thought he was crazy for living so far from the city, for choosing the isolation of a 40-acre farm over the convenience of suburban life. Lisa Park, his supervisor, had been particularly vocal about his unconventional approach. "You can't save them all, David," she'd said over coffee that morning. "Sometimes the system works exactly like it's supposed to. Some kids need intensive residential care, not a farm in the middle of nowhere." But David knew something about being written off by the system. He'd been 15 when the Kowalskis had taken him in, an angry kid with trust issues and a file that made social workers wince. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They'd given him space, work to do with his hands, and time to heal without anyone hovering over his shoulder with clipboards and therapy schedules. It had saved his life in ways no institution ever could have. Walking through the front doors of Riverside, David nodded to the security guard and made his way toward the common room. The placement meeting was already in progress, and he could hear Rebecca Walsh's practice spiel echoing down the hallway. He'd worked with Rebecca before and knew her heart was in the right place, but she ran the group home like a business. Efficient and clinical. Kids weren't merchandise, but sometimes the system treated them that way. When he entered the common room, David's eyes immediately went to the corner where a girl sat hunched in an oversized sweater. While the other teenagers were engaged in animated conversations with prospective families, she seemed to exist in her own pocket of space, untouchable and untouched. Her dark hair fell like a protective barrier around her face, and even from across the room, David could see the way she held herself, every muscle tensed as if ready to flee or disappear entirely. The three couples circulated through the room with the kind of careful enthusiasm that came from months of preparation, home studies, and training classes. David had gone through the same process, knew the weight of that hope, the careful balance between wanting to connect and trying not to appear too eager. He watched as they gravitated toward the younger children, the ones who smiled easily, whose trauma hadn't yet carved itself into permanent defensive postures. Rebecca approached him with her professional smile. "David, so good to see you again. We have some really wonderful kids here today. Let me introduce you to Marcus. He's 13 and loves basketball. Or there's Jessica, who's incredibly bright and chatty." David nodded politely, but his gaze kept drifting back to the girl in the corner. "Tell me about her," he said, indicating with a slight nod. Rebecca's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Oh, that's Maya. She's complicated, 17. Been in the system for 2 years since her parents died in a car accident. She's had several placement failures, tends to be very withdrawn. Selective mutism, anxiety issues, some self-harm behaviors. Honestly, David, she's probably not what you're looking for. She needs intensive therapeutic intervention." David studied Maya more closely. She hadn't looked up once during the entire interaction, but he could see her fingers moving slightly, as if she was drawing invisible patterns on her jeans. There was something in her posture that reminded him of himself at that age, the way he'd learned to make himself small enough that people's eyes would slide right past him. "What happened with the previous placements?" David asked. Rebecca glanced around, then lowered her voice. "The first family returned her after a week. She had a panic attack during a family barbecue and locked herself in the bathroom for 3 hours. The second placement lasted a month, but they said she was too disruptive to their routine. She doesn't sleep well, barely speaks, and she has these episodes where she just shuts down completely. The third family tried for 2 months. Bless them, but their own daughter started acting out, probably feeling displaced. She's a tough case." David nodded slowly, but instead of deterring him, Rebecca's description only solidified something that had been building in his chest since he'd first seen Maya. "Has anyone asked her what she wants?" "What she wants?" Rebecca looked genuinely puzzled. "David, she doesn't communicate. Getting more than a few words out of her is nearly impossible. That doesn't mean she doesn't have opinions." David excused himself and walked across the room, settling into the empty chair next to Maya. She tensed immediately, her shoulders drawing up toward her ears, but she didn't flee. "Hi," David said simply, not forcing eye contact, not demanding her attention. "I'm David." For a long moment, there was no response. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, Maya whispered, "Maya, that's a beautiful name. My grandmother was named Maya." It was true, though his grandmother had spelled it differently. He waited, not filling the silence with questions or expectations, just sitting beside her like her presence was enough. Maya's fingers continued their invisible drawing, and David found himself watching the movement. "Are you drawing something?" he asked gently. Her hand stilled for a moment, then she nodded almost imperceptibly. "I used to draw when I was your age. Mostly cars and trucks, nothing fancy. What do you like to draw?" Maya's voice was barely audible. "Faces, places, things I remember." David felt something shift in his chest. 4 words, but they carried weight, meaning, a glimpse into a mind that others had dismissed as broken. "Memory drawing is hard. You must be really talented." For the first time, Maya glanced up at him briefly. Her eyes were dark, wary, but there was something else there. A flicker of surprise that someone had recognized her skill as skill rather than just distraction or avoidance. Maya's had a difficult day, Rebecca's voice interrupted from behind them. The placement meetings can be overwhelming for our kids with anxiety issues. David turned slightly, not leaving his chair. She seems to be handling it fine to me. Well, she's very good at hiding her distress. It usually comes out later, unfortunately. David looked back at Maya, who had withdrawn again, her hair falling back across her face like armor. He could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way she was trying to make herself invisible again. In that moment, something crystallized. For him with absolute clarity. Rebecca, could I speak with you privately for a moment? They stepped into the hallway, and David kept his voice low. I'd like to know more about Maya's case. Rebecca's eyebrows rose. David, I really think you should consider some of our other residents. Maya needs specialized care, therapeutic interventions. She's not a good fit for a single placement, especially somewhere as isolated as your farm. What if isolation is exactly what she needs? David countered. What if all the therapeutic interventions in the world can't compete with just having space to breathe? She's been assessed by 3 different psychologists. The recommendations are all consistent, David. Residential treatment, structured environment, intensive therapy. Not a farm 2 hours from the nearest mental health facility. David thought about the vast sky over his property. The way silence there felt peaceful rather than oppressive, the way broken things had time and space to heal when they weren't constantly being examined and prodded and fixed. Has anyone ever just asked her what she thinks she needs? David, she's 17 and traumatized. She doesn't know what she needs. Maybe she knows better than anyone. David glanced back toward the common room, where Maya still sat in her corner chair, alone while families clustered around other teenagers. What would happen if nobody chose her today? Rebecca's expression softened slightly. She'd stay here until she ages out. Maybe get into a transitional living program if she qualifies. And if that doesn't work? Rebecca didn't answer, but they both knew the statistics. David had seen too many kids age out of the system unprepared. Too many young adults struggling with homelessness, addiction, and cycles of trauma they couldn't break. I want to take her home, David said quietly. David, I can't recommend that placement. Your file shows you work well with younger children, kids who can benefit from the structure and outdoor work. Maya needs professional intervention. Maya needs someone who believes she's worth saving. Rebecca studied his face carefully. This isn't about saving anyone, David. This is about realistic expectations and appropriate care. Maya isn't a lost puppy you can fix with kindness and fresh air. David felt a flash of anger, carefully controlled. No, she's a 17-year-old girl who's been told by everyone around her that she's too damaged to love. Maybe what she needs isn't another professional telling her what's wrong with her. Maybe she needs someone willing to discover what's right with her. Before Rebecca could respond, David walked back into the common room. The 3 couples were finishing their conversations, collecting business cards and scheduling follow-up visits with children who had caught their interest. Maya remained in her corner, untouched by the hope and possibilities swirling around her. David sat back down beside her. Maya, can I ask you something? She nodded slightly. If you could go anywhere, live anywhere, what would that place look like? Maya was quiet for so long that David thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, quiet, with trees, and nobody asking me questions all the time. David smiled. I know a place like that. The paperwork took 3 hours. Maya sat in Rebecca's office, listening to the adults discuss her future in terms of trial placements, therapeutic goals, and emergency contact protocols. David had insisted on expedited processing, something about Maya needing to get out of the institutional environment as quickly as possible. Rebecca had reluctantly agreed, though her disapproval hung in the air like stale cigarette smoke. Maya clutched a plastic grocery bag containing everything she owned in the world. 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, the sketchbook she kept hidden, and a small wooden box that had belonged to her mother. The box held 3 things: her parents' wedding rings, a photo of her and Sarah at the beach from 5 years ago, and a letter Sarah had written her from California that Maya had read so many times the creases were wearing through. "Maya, do you understand what's happening?" Rebecca asked, her voice taking on that careful tone adults used when they thought you might not be capable of comprehension. "Mr. Torres has agreed to provide you with a temporary placement at his home. This is a trial period to see if it's a good fit." Maya nodded, though understanding and believing were 2 different things. In her experience, adults made promises they couldn't keep, offered hope they couldn't deliver, and disappeared when things got complicated. She'd learned to expect nothing, which made disappointment impossible but also made joy unrecognizable when it appeared. David knelt down beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "Maya, I want you to know something important. This isn't about fixing you or changing you. My farm is just a place where you can be yourself without anyone telling you who that should be." Maya studied his face, searching for the telltale signs she'd learned to recognize. The slight tightness around the eyes that meant impatience. The forced smile that meant obligation. The quick glance away that meant they were already regretting their decision. But David's expression remained steady, open, genuinely calm in a way that made her chest feel strange and tight. "What if I can't sleep?" Maya whispered, voicing one of her deepest fears. The nightmares came almost every night, leaving her gasping and sweating, sometimes calling out for her parents before she remembered they weren't coming back. "Then you don't sleep," David said simply. "We'll figure it out together." Rebecca cleared her throat. "David, Maya's sleep disturbances are documented as severe. She may need medical intervention if the insomnia persists. She may need time." David replied without taking his eyes off Maya. "How long has it been since you felt safe enough to really sleep?" The question caught Maya off guard. Nobody had ever asked her about feeling safe. They'd asked about sleep hygiene, medication compliance, and coping strategies, but never about the fundamental terror that kept her eyes open in the dark, watching for threats that might never come, but felt perpetually present. "I don't remember," Maya admitted, and realized with a start that it was true. She couldn't remember the last time she'd fallen asleep without fear. David nodded as if this made perfect sense. "That's okay. Memory comes back when you're ready for it." The drive to Millbrook took 2 hours through Michigan countryside that gradually shifted from urban sprawl to rolling farmland. Maya pressed herself against the passenger door, watching the landscape change through the window. David had offered to let her choose the music, but she'd shaken her head, preferring the quiet hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional comment he made about landmarks they passed. "That's the Hendricks Dairy Farm," he said, pointing to a cluster of red barns. "Mrs. Hendricks makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. She's been trying to get me to enter the county fair bake-off for years." Maya glanced at him sideways. "Do you bake?" "Terribly," David admitted with a laugh. "I can manage scrambled eggs and grilled cheese without burning down the house, but that's about my limit. Good thing I know where to find excellent takeout in Millbrook." The admission should have worried her. Previous foster families had made elaborate promises about home-cooked meals and family dinners, then quickly grown frustrated when Maya couldn't eat during anxiety episodes, or when her presence made their perfect family dynamics feel strained and artificial. But something about David's casual acknowledgement of his limitations felt more honest than all those well-intentioned promises. "What do you do when you're hungry?" Maya asked, surprising herself with the question. "Rosie's diner makes a mean meatloaf, and the grocery store has a decent deli counter. Plus, I've been known to live on peanut butter sandwiches for weeks. At a time, David glanced over at her. What about you? Any foods you particularly love or hate? Maya considered this. I like soup. It's hard to mess up soup. Good to know. I make excellent soup from a can. As they drove deeper into rural Michigan, Maya felt something loosening in her chest. The spaces between houses grew wider, the traffic thinned to almost nothing, and the sky seemed bigger somehow, less hemmed in by buildings and power lines. She'd lived in cities her entire life, first with her parents in their cramped apartment, then in various foster homes and residential neighborhoods where the houses stood shoulder to shoulder like soldiers in formation. It's quiet out here, Maya observed. Too quiet? David asked, and Maya caught something in his tone that suggested he genuinely cared about her answer. No, I like quiet. Me too. Took me a while to get used to it after growing up in Detroit, but now city noise makes me jumpy. Maya filed this information away. David had grown up in Detroit. He understood urban life, understood noise and crowds, and the way silence could feel like luxury. This wasn't some suburban fantasy about pastoral healing. This was a choice he'd made for himself, for his own reasons. They turned onto a gravel road lined with towering oak trees, their branches forming a canopy overhead that filtered the afternoon sunlight into dancing patterns. Maya found herself sitting up straighter, pressing her face closer to the window. The road curved gently through what seemed like endless acres of open field, dotted with wildflowers, and bisected by a creek that sparkled in the distance. This is it, David said as they approached a house that looked like it had grown up from the landscape itself. It was 2 stories, painted white with green shutters, surrounded by gardens that appeared to have been planned by someone who understood that beauty didn't require perfection. A massive oak tree shaded the front porch, where 2 rocking chairs sat facing the fields. Maya's breath caught in her throat. It was exactly the kind of place she'd imagined when she was little, the kind of house she'd drawn in margins of school. Notebooks during the years when her parents were still alive and home felt permanent. David parked the truck and turned off the engine. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of bird songs and wind through leaves, and the distant sound of water moving over stones. Maya sat frozen, afraid that moving might break whatever spell had created this place, might reveal it to be another disappointment, dressed up as possibility. Take your time, David said gently. It's a lot to take in. Maya opened the truck door slowly and stepped onto the gravel driveway. The air smelled different here, clean and green and completely free of the industrial undertones that had flavored every breath she'd taken for the past 2 years. A red-winged blackbird called from somewhere in the reeds near the creek, and Maya found herself turning toward the sound instinctively. That's the creek I mentioned, David said, following her gaze. It runs through the whole property. Good for thinking, if you're into that sort of thing. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. She could see herself sitting by that water sketchbook, in her lap, drawing the way light moved across the surface. For the first time in months, she felt the familiar itch in her fingers, the desire to capture something beautiful rather than simply document the ugly reality around her. David pulled her plastic bag from the truck bed and gestured toward the house. Ready to see inside? Maya followed him up the porch steps, noting the way the wooden boards were weathered but solid, the way the screen door hung straight and true on its hinges. Everything about this place spoke of care without pretension, maintenance without obsession. It felt lived in rather than staged. The front door opened into a living room with hardwood floors, comfortable furniture that looked like it had been chosen for durability rather than style, and windows that let in so much natural light that Maya had to blink to adjust. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with what appeared to be an eclectic mix of repair manuals, classic literature, and photography. Books. A stone fireplace dominated another wall, with family photos scattered across the mantel that showed David at various ages with an elderly couple. who must have been the Kowalskis he'd mentioned. "Guest room is upstairs," David said, leading the way up a staircase lined with more photographs. "You can change anything you want about it. Paint the walls, rearrange the furniture, whatever makes it feel like yours." The guest room was simple but bright, with a double bed covered in a blue quilt, a desk positioned near the window, and empty shelves waiting to be filled. Maya set her plastic bag on the bed and walked to the window, which looked out over the fields toward the creek. She could see for miles in every direction, nothing but open space and sky, and the kind of peace she'd thought existed only in her imagination. "Maya," David said softly from the doorway, "this is your room now, for as long as you want it to be." Maya turned to face him, and for a moment, the walls she'd built around her heart trembled dangerously. This man barely knew her, had no obligation to her, had every reason to change his mind once he discovered how much effort it took to live with someone whose mind had been shattered and poorly reassembled. But he was standing there offering her not just shelter, but belonging, and Maya didn't know how to process such an impossible gift. "What if I break something?" she whispered. David smiled, and Maya caught a glimpse of something that might have been his own old pain, carefully healed but not forgotten. "Then we'll fix it together." The first morning at David's farm began before sunrise. Maya had been awake for hours, sitting on the edge of her bed watching the sky slowly lighten. Outside her window, sleep had come in fragments, interrupted by her usual nightmares, but something was different about waking up here. The silence felt protective rather than ominous, and the unfamiliar sounds were birdsong and wind through leaves instead of sirens and shouting from adjacent rooms. She heard David moving around downstairs, the soft sounds of someone trying not to wake a household. Maya crept to her door and listened, trying to decode the morning routine of this place that was supposed to be her home now. Coffee maker gurgling, refrigerator opening and closing, the back door creaking open, followed by footsteps on gravel that faded toward what she assumed were the outbuildings she'd glimpsed yesterday. Maya had learned to read the rhythms of the places she lived, to anticipate moods and expectations, through the sounds people made when they thought no one was listening. Foster families always had unspoken rules about morning routines, about when it was acceptable to emerge from your room, about how much space you were allowed to take up in the kitchen. She'd made mistakes before, appearing too early and disrupting carefully choreographed family rituals, or sleeping too late and missing some unspoken deadline for gratitude and participation. At Riverside, breakfast was served at precisely 7:30 in the cafeteria, and if you missed it, you went hungry until lunch. The early birds got the best seats away from the kitchen noise, while stragglers ended up at tables near the dish. Return where the air was thick with steam and the sound of clattering plates. Maya had usually chosen to go hungry rather than navigate the social dynamics of the dining hall, surviving on the granola bars and crackers she hoarded from dinner. Service. Here, she had no template to follow. David hadn't given her a schedule or a list of expectations. He'd simply said she could come downstairs whenever she was ready, could eat whatever she found in the kitchen, could spend her day however she chose. The freedom felt dangerous, like a test she might fail through ignorance of the correct answers. Maya dressed quietly in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday, then sat back down on her bed to wait. Through her window, she could see David in the distance, working on something, near a red barn that looked like it had been recently painted. He moved with the easy efficiency of someone comfortable in his own space, and Maya found herself sketching his movements in her mind, noting the way his shoulders curved over whatever task occupied his attention. At 8 o'clock, she heard the back door open again and David's voice calling up the stairs. "Maya, breakfast is ready whenever you want it. No rush." Maya's stomach clenched with anxiety. This was the first test, the first opportunity to get something wrong. She made her way downstairs slowly, pausing on each step to listen for clues about what might be expected of her. The kitchen was bright with morning sunlight streaming through windows that looked out over the vegetable garden. A plate sat on the small wooden table, covered with a clean dish towel to keep the food warm. David looked up from where he was washing dishes at the sink. "Good morning. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made scrambled eggs and toast. There's juice in the refrigerator, or coffee if you drink it." Maya approached the table cautiously. The plate contained perfectly normal scrambled eggs, 2 pieces of buttered wheat toast, and several strips of bacon arranged neatly beside a small glass of orange juice. It looked like the kind of breakfast that appeared in advertisements for happy families, the kind Maya had seen other kids eating in previous foster homes, while she subsisted on whatever was left after the biological children had been served. "This is for me?" Maya asked, her voice barely audible. David turned from the sink, dish towel in his hands, and Maya saw something that might have been sadness flicker across his expression. "Of course it's for you. You live here now." Maya sat down and picked up the fork, but her hands were shaking slightly. The eggs were still warm, seasoned with something that made them taste richer than any eggs she could remember eating. The toast was thick-cut and perfectly golden, and the bacon was crispy without being burned. Someone had taken care with this meal, had invested time and attention in getting it right. "Is it okay?" David asked, and Maya realized she'd been eating in complete silence for several minutes. She nodded, not trusting her voice. It was more than okay. It was perfect in a way that made her chest feel tight, and her eyes threatened to fill with tears. She'd become accustomed to cafeteria food and hastily prepared meals that conveyed obligation rather than care. This breakfast tasted like someone had thought about what might make her morning better. David poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. "I usually spend mornings working on projects around the property. You're welcome to join me if you want, or you can explore on your own. There's no agenda here, Maya. No expectations about how you should spend your time." Maya finished the last bite of toast and looked up at him. "What kind of projects?" "Today I'm replacing some boards on the chicken coop." "Nothing exciting, just maintenance." David smiled. "I've got about a dozen hens who think they rule the place. They're probably wondering where their breakfast is right about now." "You have chickens?" "Among other things. 2 goats, a very old horse named Walter, and a barn cat who shows up when she feels like it." David rinsed his coffee mug and placed it in the dish drainer. "Want to meet them?" Maya nodded, surprising herself. She'd never lived anywhere with animals, had never had the opportunity to learn whether she even liked them. Her parents had always lived in apartments that didn't allow pets, and foster families rarely wanted to complicate their lives with additional responsibilities. They walked across the farmyard together, David pointing out various features of the property. The vegetable garden was larger than Maya had realized, with neat rows of plants she couldn't identify, but that looked healthy and well-tended. A greenhouse sat behind the main garden, its glass panels glinting in the morning sun. The barn was bigger than it had appeared from her bedroom window, painted the same red as the smaller outbuildings, and clearly maintained with the same careful attention David seemed to apply to everything else. The chicken coop sat in a fenced area behind the barn, and Maya could hear the birds before she could see them, a mixture of clucking and what sounded suspiciously like complaints about delayed service. David unlatched the gate and gestured for Maya to follow him into the enclosure. "Ladies, I'd like you to meet Maya," David announced to the chickens, as if he were making formal introductions. "Maya, these are my girls. They're excellent conversationalists, and they lay the best eggs in the county." Maya found herself smiling, the first genuine smile she could remember producing in months. The chickens were indeed acting like they owned the place, strutting around with an air of importance and eyeing David expectantly. One particularly bold hen walked directly up to Maya and studied her with what appeared to be serious consideration. "That's Henrietta," David explained. "She's the matriarch around here. Very opinionated about strangers. Henrietta clucked. Once, then apparently decided Maya was acceptable because she wandered off to investigate a patch of scratched earth near the fence. Maya watched the chickens move around their space with complete confidence in their right to be exactly where. They were, doing exactly what they pleased. They seem happy, Maya observed. They are happy. Good food, safe place to sleep, freedom to be chickens. David scattered corn from a bucket near the coop entrance, and the hens immediately flocked to the feeding area. Sometimes I think we make life too complicated. These girls have figured out that happiness is pretty simple. Maya understood what he wasn't saying directly. Sometimes the basic requirements for contentment were safety, sustenance, and the freedom to exist without constantly defending your right to space in the world. She'd forgotten what it felt like to occupy space without apology, to move through a morning without calculating the emotional cost of every interaction. After David finished his repairs on the coop, they walked the perimeter of the property together. Maya discovered that 40 acres was vast in a way she'd never experienced, stretching beyond her ability to see the boundaries. The creek David had mentioned wound through the eastern section of the land, bordered by cattails and wild iris, that created a natural sanctuary for birds and small animals. "This is where I come when I need to think," David said as they stood on a small wooden bridge that crossed the water. Something about moving water that helps sort out tangled thoughts. Maya leaned against the bridge railing and watched the current carry fallen leaves downstream. The water was clear enough that she could see smooth stones on the bottom, and tiny fish darted between the shadows cast by overhanging branches. She could imagine herself here with her sketchbook, trying to capture the way light played across the surface, the way the cattails swayed in the breeze. "David," Maya said quietly, "why did you choose me?" David was quiet for a long moment, and Maya worried she'd asked something too personal, too direct. She'd learned that adults often became uncomfortable when asked to explain their motivations, especially when those motivations involved children they were supposed to be helping. "I saw something in you that reminded me of myself at your age," David finally said. Not the specific circumstances, but the feeling of being written off by people who couldn't see past the damage to the person underneath. Maya studied his profile as he gazed across the water. "Were you in foster care?" "From the time I was 12 until I aged out. Bounced around between homes and group facilities until the Kowalskis took a chance on an angry 15-year-old who thought the world owed him something." David's voice carried the weight of old pain that had been examined and processed, but not forgotten. "They gave me space to figure out who I was without constantly having to prove I deserved to exist." Maya felt something shift in her understanding of this place, of David's motivations for bringing her here. This wasn't charity or obligation or some misguided attempt to fix her. This was recognition, one survivor creating space for another to heal in whatever way worked best. "What if I can't get better?" Maya whispered. David turned to look at her directly. "Better than what?" "Better than the version of yourself that survived things that should have killed your spirit, but didn't." "Maya, you're not broken. You're strong in ways most people never have to learn to be." Maya felt tears threatening, not from sadness but from the unfamiliar sensation of being truly seen. For the first time in 2 years, someone was looking at her without trying to fix her, without cataloging her deficits, without measuring her against some standard of normalcy she'd never be able to achieve. "Can I stay here?" she asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "For as long as you want," David replied without hesitation. "This is your home now." 3 months had passed since Maya first walked through David's front door, and the transformation was so gradual she almost didn't notice it happening. It started with small things: sleeping through the night without nightmares, eating breakfast without her hands shaking, walking to the creek each morning with her sketchbook, no longer afraid that someone would demand to know where she was going or when she'd return. The sketches had evolved from desperate attempts to capture fleeting moments of peace into detailed studies of life, returning to normal rhythms. Pages filled with Henrietta's proud strut, Walter the horse dozing in afternoon sunshine, the way. Morning mist rose from the creek like prayers made visible. Maya's art teacher at her old school had always criticized her work as too dark, too focused on shadows and empty spaces. Here, she found herself drawn to light. David had given her complete freedom to explore the property, and Maya had claimed every corner of it. She discovered a hidden grove where wild strawberries grew in summer, a hilltop that offered views of 3 neighboring counties, and a spot near the creek where deer came to drink at twilight. Each place became part of her internal map of belonging, proof that she could exist somewhere without constantly defending her right to space. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in October. Maya had been helping David repair a section of fence that had been damaged in a storm, handing him tools and holding boards steady while he worked. They'd fallen into comfortable conversation about nothing important, the kind of easy exchange that happens between people who've learned to trust each other's presence. "Maya," David said, pausing in his work to look at her directly, "I need to ask you something." Maya's old instincts flared immediately, the familiar tension that accompanied serious conversations. In her experience, adults only announced their need to ask something when the question would be difficult to answer or painful to hear. "Lisa from Child Services wants to schedule a home visit next week, standard procedure for long-term placements." David set down his hammer and gave Maya his full attention. "But I wanted to check with you first. How do you feel about this arrangement? Becoming permanent?" Maya stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. "Permanent? I'd like to officially adopt you, if that's something you'd want. You'd be family, not just a foster placement." David's voice was steady, but Maya caught something vulnerable in his expression. No pressure, and no rush to decide. "I just wanted you to know that's where my heart is." The words hit Maya like a physical force. Family, not temporary care, or trial placement, or therapeutic intervention, but actual family with someone who'd chosen her not despite her damage, but including all of it. Someone who'd seen her at her most broken and decided she was worth keeping. Maya felt tears spilling down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. Not the silent tears she'd perfected in group homes, designed to avoid attracting attention, but the kind of crying that came from a place too deep for shame. David stepped closer and wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time since her parents died, Maya allowed herself to be held without calculating when the embrace would end or what might be expected in return. "Is that a yes?" David asked gently. Maya nodded against his shoulder, unable to trust her voice. Yes to adoption. Yes to family. Yes to the impossible gift of belonging somewhere permanently. Yes to the radical idea that she deserved love not because she'd earned it or fixed herself or become easier to manage, but simply because she existed and someone had chosen to see her worth. That afternoon, Maya walked to her favorite spot by the creek and opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. But instead of drawing the landscape around her, she found herself sketching faces. Her parents, smiling the way they looked in her clearest memories. Sarah, older now but still with the gap-toothed grin Maya remembered from their last day together. David, with the patient expression he wore when explaining how something worked, or listening to her stumbling attempts at conversation. And finally, almost without conscious intention, Maya drew herself. Not the hollow-eyed girl from the group home, but the person she was becoming here. Someone who belonged. Someone who mattered. Someone who'd learned that being broken didn't mean being worthless, and that healing didn't require becoming someone else entirely. The sun was setting by the time she walked back to the house, where David was starting dinner and humming something tuneless under his breath. Maya paused in the doorway, watching him move around the kitchen with the comfortable efficiency of someone at home in his own space. This was her space now too, her kitchen, her home, her family. "How was your afternoon?" David asked, looking up from the stove. "Perfect," Maya said, and meant it completely. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be. Chosen not for what she could become, but for exactly who she already was. And that understanding changed everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.